map. If you have worked with mind maps, it's just a visual representation of the topics I would like to bring to your attention today, and that's a very small but very concise part of how we understand divorce. And first, I think it's a very heavy topic. The statistics show that 50% of marriages end up in divorce. So this means every second marriage will end up in divorce. And that's a very, very hard and disheartening in a way, and it's a really a painful topic to discuss. So that's a reverse of the joke. If I wanted to start with a joke, that's rather reverse. But don't give up on me, so let's go to what I want to say. So, starting with if it works. Definition. So, of course, before we start talking about divorce, we need to define marriage, yeah? So, starting with the definition, marriage is a model for intimate relationships on personal and social level. So first of all, as a personal relationship model, we speak about companionship, we speak about support between the spouses, we speak about environment for raising children. And second, as a social model, marriage is defined as an institution. So it's providing an institution for intimate relationships in society. I need to extend this definition, of course, because we're talking about Christian view of marriage, so it needs to be biblical. It has to be based on the Bible. And here I would like to address the Old Testament view of marriage. And I go to Old Testament view of marriage as a covenant, a permanent union between male and female, and based on covenant stipulations. And here we have in the Old Testament the beautiful picture which represents that relationship between God and Israel. Going to the New Testament, once again, we have the marriage as a covenant. And here the same, the dynamics are represented by the beautiful picture between Christ as a husband and the church as a bride. Going further, of course, being based on the Bible, but also needs to be hermeneutical. So it needs to be about the interpretation of the Bible by the Christian traditions. And here I go to the main Christian traditions, Protestant, Orthodox, and Catholic. And they all agree, very, very interestingly, they all agree marriage is a covenant. Marriage is a lifelong relationship between man and woman. It's permanent. It is intended to be permanent by God. And as such, all main Christian traditions agree. There is no arguments there. And then when what is intended by God, the permanency of this marriage union is applied in the human context, it is becoming conditioned. And so this application is where the main Christian traditions disagree. What does it mean to condition marriage in its application by humans, as we all are, aren't we? We'll go straight to the covenant. And here, in regards to the covenant, we need to talk about the stipulations. And just to clearly define them, first of all, we have mutual companionship. And then if you go to further, we have the spouse's character. So we have several points in the mutual companionship. We have several points. You can cover this further and further if you go to my presentation. And moral, spiritual, emotional, physical, intellectual, social. And here it goes with spouse's character, Christian faith, moral framework, and boundaries. What my point here is to understand that marriage crises appear because there is social and personal challenges. These challenges every marriage faces in society as an institution and in personal life as a relationship between the two spouses. And so we have several social challenges. And we can see them here, and I'm not sure whether I'll be able to show them. Yeah. So we have the consumerism, where we have the value and the quality as important factors. And so basically, if the spouse or both spouses do not like the value or the quality of the other spouse, simply revert to search of a better one. Separation here, I mean easy divorce and remarriage. Once again, lack of satisfaction in marriage leads to easy divorce and remarriage. So it's like in a search, in a journey for a better partner. And then we have cohabitation, where we lack the actual safety framework of marriage. Contraceptives, interestingly enough, they're also here challenging the marriage because we have their positive role in marriage in terms of planning for children, and then the negative role outside of marriage in exploration of sexual desires. Then we have abortion and illegitimacy here. Once again, we're lacking the safety framework of marriage for the raising of children. Sexual revolution has started a long time ago and yet still developing in terms of exploration of sexual desires outside of marriage. And finally, we have homosexuality, which challenges the marriage regarding the two gender coming together and for the procreation. Then we go to the domestic challenges, and here once again we speak about internal abuse inside the family, and we have several physical abuse, we have emotional abuse, sexual abuse, economic abuse, spiritual abuse, and probably you can list more, verbal and so on. And all this shows how inside the marriage we have the challenge of the relationship between the two partners, all presented through these challenges of this intimate relationship. And so finally, let's go to the sixth stream of the Protestant theology, marriage crisis, and understanding how the social challenges and the personal challenges impact the marriage. We see how the marriage crisis appear. And in the marriage crisis, we can start from the perspective of, once again, defining what marriage is. And here the emphasis is about lifelong covenantal nature. And we see this covenant nature presented in the Genesis chapter 2, where there is the creation account clearly shows the diversity of the two genders coming in one unity of one flesh. The emphasis here is once again on the permanency of marriage, marriage as a covenant. And we see the language there, living and cleaving, is a language which designates a covenantal relationship. This becomes very important for Jesus' teaching in the New Testament. Next one, we go to covenantal stipulations. What are the stipulations of the covenant? Are they in the Bible? And here we have Exodus 21, the law of the slave wife. And here we have the stipulations of food, clothing, and love, or conjugal rights. So the husband who is taking a slave wife is obliged to provide these things, food, clothing, and love. If he doesn't provide this, the wife is free to leave the marriage, have the divorce legitimately. And interestingly enough, this appears in the New Testament, in Ephesians chapter 5, very important passage for all Christian traditions about marriage. We have some covenant obligations. Interestingly presented here how the husband needs to take care of his wife as he takes care of his own body by feeding it and clothing it. And the emphasis also is on love. So you see the resemblance between the Old Testament and the New Testament here. And once again, we have the representation between Christ and the church of this covenantal relationship. Then we go further here to see the reconciliation part of marriage crisis, and here we go to Paul. And in 1 Corinthians 7:11, we have the wrong application of the idea of covenant in the context of Paul. And for Paul here, the goal is for the mutual reconciliation of the spouses, and that's the purpose and the resolution of misunderstanding of marriage covenant in the social context there. We go further to actually see what is the breakdown of marriage. Once again, here is the violation of the covenant stipulations. And in the Old Testament, we see this, that Yahweh God divorces Israel here due to violation of the covenant stipulations. And then we see the remarriage. Yahweh remarries the united nation of Israel and Judah. Further on, we see Jesus' teaching. As I mentioned, the creation account provides the covenant understanding of marriage. Jesus is using this. And when he is challenged by the Pharisees with the law, Deuteronomy 24, he is interpreting it through the creation of the first marriage as a covenant from the creation account. And then we see Matthew is taking Jesus' teaching on marriage, the permanent teaching on marriage, and Matthew applies that teaching in his own context and towards his own audience, which is predominantly Jews. And here we see the introduction of the exception clause. Divorce on the grounds of sexual misconduct. And then we see the allowance for remarriage as well. And then we see Paul taking the permanency of marriage, the teaching of Jesus, and applying it in his own context, where we have the marriage between believers and unbelievers. And when the unbeliever desires to leave the marriage, then the believer is allowed to divorce and remarry here. And so, as you see, the emphasis is on the permanency of marriage, the emphasis is on the covenant of marriage, and the fulfillment of the covenant stipulations. And so, the divorce becomes an exception when the fulfillment of the covenant stipulation is not complete. When we have the violation of the covenant stipulations, we see that the grounds of divorce are legitimate, and the grounds of remarriage as well. And so remarriage becomes a new chapter, becomes a joyful event, the same as the first marriage. And we see this part of the Old Testament. When we see the Yahweh marries again, Yahweh marries Israel and Judah, the terms are very bright and very cheerful. So, yeah, to summarize, I have more here, but we don't have time. Yeah, to summarize, read my book. So, yeah, basically, there are many topics to discuss, but remember the definition of marriage. Marriage is a covenant, permanent union, and the marriage crisis appeared because of the pressure from society and internally. And the resolution is not a divorce and remarriage straight away. The resolution goes through the understanding of the long life union of marriage, through understanding of reconciliation, and then goes through exhausting all the possible means to save the marriage until it reaches the lack of possibility or grounds to save the marriage, and then it goes to divorce and remarriage when we have the violation of the covenant stipulations. Thank you so much for your attention. The questions, yeah? Oh, sorry.
Okay, yeah. Do you want to talk us through the questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I almost forgot about the questions.
Here's some right.
Yeah. So the questions are very general in a way, but I think they're important. The first one is, what is my view on marriage, divorce, and remarriage? So for each of you, I'm sure that probably many of you have different views on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And simply share these views among each other in the simplest and shortest possible way. And then think about how these views have helped you in your own deal with your own relationships. So how does this view help me to deal with relationships? And finally, how do I see the future of marriage? Because perhaps you have heard in the media that many challenge that future, that marriage has no future. And various concepts have appeared out there, like monogamish or other concepts which simply suggest that there is no future. So think about what is the future of marriage. What do you think is the future of marriage? So please enjoy.